OCAD University is situated in Takaranto, also known as Toronto, the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians on the lands in which we live, work, and create. We give thanks to these nations who have lived here and protected this territory prior to and against colonization. And we also acknowledge um, that we now live and work on these territories. We, as you may have noticed, are recording this session. So we will share the recording after the session. So don't feel like you have to urgently or take notes. We'll be sharing everything afterwards. You'll notice that there is a Q&A portion. Feel free to use the Q&A function, which is found at the bottom of the Zoom bar with the little chat with the question mark. Um, if you would like to ask them throughout, you can do that. We'll be taking all of the questions at the end. And if you have any tech issues, feel free to message us, and either Susan or myself can kind of help you work through the tech issues. For those who don't know me, my name is Alex, and I work at OCAD's Center for Emerging Artists and Designers. I run the entrepreneurship portfolio. If you are not familiar with the CAD, we do a ton of programming to support students and alumni through all aspects of their creative practice. We do it within three portfolios: your traditional career development, which could look like things like applying for jobs, our design career fair, which is actually happening. There's a workshops happening concurrently today, and also our actual fair tomorrow. Our experiential learning portfolio, which gives students an opportunity to gain some real life work experience while kind of working through their classes. And finally, the entrepreneurship portfolio, which is the portfolio I run. And we like to think about the entrepreneurship portfolio as giving you the tools, the skills, and the kind of like knowledge you need to tackle aspects of your creative practice that will eventually kind of bridge the business side. So whether that be selling things, running a business, starting a business, understanding contracts, that whole kind of gamut. So it's quite a diverse set of um, activities that we do. And this partnership is kind of a recognition that, a lot of the international students coming out of OCAD also have this question of how can I start my own business while working towards, you know, while they're in school and also towards potentially a PR. And so we've partnered with Susan in the International Student Support Office to deliver these workshops with Elizabeth. But I'll pass it to Susan to talk a little bit more about the Student Support Office. Susan.
Great, thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Kemp. I'm the manager of the International Student Support Office here at OCAD. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think a lot of you probably have been in touch with our office already, but just to let you know, we're here to support you throughout your studies at the university. So that can be right from the time that you arrive, if you need support with adjusting to life in Canada and getting settled here. And we're here for you right up until graduation to help you with that transition as well. So we also run a lot of workshops and social activities and things throughout the year. So we hope to see you at some of those as well. So today it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Elizabeth Long from LM Law Group. Elizabeth is a leading immigration lawyer in Canada. She's an active advocate of immigration and refugee rights in Canada and frequently presents and advises on immigration issues to organizations, universities, members of parliament, unions, and the media. She's also testified several times before the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration on various immigration policies. Elizabeth has also been certified by the Law Society of Ontario as a specialist in citizenship and immigration law, a prestigious list of which only approximately 65 lawyers in Canada belong. So Elizabeth, I'll turn things over to you now to talk to the students.
Well, thank you guys so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. These days, immigration, you'll see it's always in the news, and there are so many changes that have been happening. And so it's, we did this session last year, and now this year, when I'm presenting again, you'll see if you attended last year's that there has been quite a few changes for this year. All right, so let's get into it. Let me share my screen here. You guys see the right screen there? Okay, excellent. Okay, so first of all, let's just make sure we're all on the same page at what self-employment means in the context of immigration law. Um, when you are a contractor, it doesn't mean that you don't have a contract, okay? Or if you're not a contractor, you don't have a contract. A contractor is someone who is self-employed compared to someone who is a salaried employee. Okay, so someone who is in taxes, when you file your taxes in Canada, if you yourself receive a T4, or if when your employee when they give you your payroll, they're deducting taxes and CPP and EI, that means you're an employee. When you work with someone and they say, okay, well, you invoice me for the work that you're going to be doing, and then I pay you exactly what I said I would pay you, um, and I don't do any deductions, and then you go and file your own taxes, that's where we have that indication that you are then self-employed, you're a contractor. Okay. You have under the CRA rules, which a lot of the immigration adopts their interpretation of what self-employment means. It means you have your own tools as well. But even if you were working somewhere and you were using some of their tools, you still can be considered a contractor. You're billing your own clients. You don't. It's not a given that they're just going to give you the payroll slip. You send them an invoice for your work, right? So those are some of the main indices of the fact that you're self-employed. Now, when you're a student, can you work as a self-employed artist? Yes, you can. For your clients in Canada, then you're subject to the limitations for hours. So, the amount of hours that you're able to work while you are a full-time student, you're subject to that, okay? Now, for clients outside of Canada, there is no limit on the hours because that is not work that requires permission in Canada, okay? Because they're not allowed to limit what you can do for work outside of Canada. It does not compete with the labor market in Canada, okay? So if you're a graphic designer, for example, and you're doing work for clients outside of Canada, you can work for them 100 hours a week. That is not limited. They can't control what you do over there. Okay, so I wanted to go over some of the possible work permits for self-employed artists. Now, if you're studying in Canada, you may be able to get your postgrad work permits, although for those people who have applied for your study permits after November of last year, and if you're not getting a degree granting program, graduating, you may have issues with getting the postgrad work permit under the new rules. If you are still graduating the degree grantee program, you can certainly apply for your postgrad work permit. But let's say you don't want to apply for the postgrad work permit. Let's say you want to apply for another work permit, or let's say your work permit is going to expire and you want to apply for another work permit. What kind of work permits can you get? So one of the work permits that we have been able to apply for is called a significant benefit work permit. And this is where we can show that you will be providing significant cultural, economic benefits, social benefits to Canada through your work in Canada. Okay. The other one is the entrepreneur work permit. This is where you say, well, I'm going to be starting a business in Canada, and my business in Canada is going to provide significant benefits to Canada, such as cultural, social, economic benefits to Canada. We do, with this entrepreneur work permit, need to show that you have a viable business plan and that the funding will be enough to run the operations of the business. There are also free trade agreement professional work permits for those of you who have certain occupations, for example, such as graphic designers are for different countries. And so free trade agreement professionals, you have to be a national of a country that has a free trade agreement with Canada. So for example, US, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, the EU, Britain, Australia, Japan. It just depends on Chile, depends on which country it is. But you can get the free trade agreement if you fall under that. Certain professions, we can get a work permit that is LMIA exempt. Okay, LMIAs are called labor market impact assessments. And those normally, if you're going to be an employee of a company and you need to get a work permit, normally the default way is for the employer to have to show that they can't find a Canadian to do the job and then do that. It's very, very difficult these days because they've been cutting the options for LMIAs. But these free trade agreements, all of these kind of work permits that I'm letting you guys know is exempt from the LMIAs. If you have a business outside of Canada already that's existing, last year I was telling you that you could apply for an intercompany transferee work permit where we can transfer you to work in the business in Canada. Now, late last year, the government put in new interpretations of this, where they said that in order for intercompany transferee work permit to work, you have to have operations in 2 countries that are revenue generating. Now, here's the thing. One of those countries could be in Canada. So it's not that we can do an intercompany work permit for you in the very beginning if you don't have operations in Canada yet. But let's say you set up your operations based on your post-grad work permit in Canada and it is revenue generating and your operations outside of Canada is still running, then we could apply for an intercompany transferee work permit for you. And finally, we do have what's called a francophone work permit, and this is for those people who can speak and listen. Just pass the CLB-5 for speaking and listening for the francophone. And if you have, then you create a business that offers yourself a job, we could apply for the francophone work permit as well. All right, so here's the question. Let's say you get the work permit. How is it going to help with regard to your express entry? Well, last year I said one of the ways you can do that is all of these kind of employer-specific work permits, they would be able to help you get points for arranged employment, okay? Because first of all, if you are self-employed, your work does not count as Canadian work experience points because Canadian work experience points does not count self-employment points for the CRS or express entry, okay? However, you can use it to qualify yourself to get into the pool for the federal skilled worker class. Now, what we have been able to do is for many of you, if you have an employer-specific work permit, like the work permits that I was just going over, not the post-grad work permit, but the employer-specific work permits, and you can show that you have been working in that position for at least a year, okay, then you would be eligible for the arranged employment points, which is 50 points for most high-skilled occupations and 200 points for those occupations that are in the executive management level. So if you're the CEO of your company, okay, and you run your company. Here's the kicker though. You notice I said if it's still in place, because the minister just before Christmas, December 23rd, had the most, it was, I had to say, it was a very Grinch move. He had announced that they're going to pause allowing arranged employment points for express entry in the spring of this year. Now, why do I still have an if there? The reason I have an if is because we now have an election that is likely going to come in early spring of this year. So it could be that the minister may be out before the announcements are actually made to cancel arranged employment points. If that's the case, then we could still use arranged employment points. Who knows? And then if we get a new minister, who knows what they're going to be doing? Okay, so this one we'll need to monitor. But for those people who may already have arranged employment points, we can certainly put you into the pool, and you can still see if you can get an invitation to apply. My suggestion is, if this works for you already, get yourself in there. These days, the immigration system is changing so much that oftentimes you don't have time to waste. You really, really don't have time to waste. If you qualify for something, go and apply for it now, because it just might just not be there afterwards. And that's the case for one of the programs I'm not going to talk about today. It was in place last year, but it's not in place anymore, which is the self-employed category for permanent residence for artists. That was put on pause last year. And so we can no longer apply. That was a fantastic program for artists. If you were self-employed, we could have applied for permanent residence for many, and we did apply for permanent residence for many artists. That, however, has been taken away. All right, what else is there? So we also have the OIMP Masters and PhD streams. So if you graduated from Masters or PhD in Ontario, we could put you into the pool, but you have to be invited to apply, and apply within 2 years of your graduation. And in these programs, there are no job offers required. You do have to be ready to enter into the labor market. So you can't be saying, oh, I'm going to go and do another PhD after you've finished your master's. You have to be ready to work. But the main kicker is that you still have to be selected through a system. You don't just get to apply. You have to put your name into the pool and see if you're selected. And unfortunately, these days, a lot of people, even if you go and put yourself into the pool, because the criteria is if you've graduated from a school outside of Toronto, you get more points. It depends on the industry and your studies, and unfortunately arts and humanities are placed at the lowest levels. So it really will depend on the situation, and you can't really bank on the fact that you for sure are going to be able to apply through this category. One other program that I like to go into is the startup visa category. So the startup visa category is something where up to 5 founders together can apply together to start a business, and up to 5. It could be less than 5. But normally we're looking at 4 to 5 founders together to start a business. And if it is found to be viable and have potential, and it's accepted by a designated organization, such as an incubator, angel investor group, or venture capital group, then you could then apply for permanent residence, all the founders. And so Each of these founders have to own at least 10% of the business, and all of the founders who are the applicants have to own at least 50% of the business. So it's not really something where you get 10% from a Canadian business that's owned by a Canadian. It should be that you and other founders are coming together to do this. Each of the founder must be able and willing to manage the business, and each have to have at least a CLB level 5 for language, which you guys should not have any issues. You can also apply for a work permit as well while waiting for the permanent residence, and the government just allowed for the 3-year open work permit. Now, here's the thing about the startup visa. The startup visa is something where you do have to have significant funds in order to pay for the for investing in the business, and also to pay for the fees that the designated organizations will charge as well. But certainly for certain people, it might be a good option to apply for this category if you are business minded. All right, so what should you do? What are your next steps at this point? First of all, you have to understand your immigration pathway. What is your pathway? This pathway probably won't be a straight line. Probably there will be many things, many roads leading in and out of the pathway. And what we need to do is, for many of you, we will provide you with options, and we will look at plan A's and plan B's and plan C's. Okay. If you want to go the entrepreneurial route, it's also something where you can't just say, oh, I'm going to start a business and then I'll come to you afterwards, Elizabeth, and we can do this. No, I need to be there from the very beginning, discussing what the structure is going to be, how it's, because if you can't stay in Canada, there's no point in having a business in Canada that you can't stay and run. So I have to be there from the very beginning, speaking with the corporate lawyers, speaking with the tax lawyers, speaking with employment lawyers, etc., to make sure that the structure that you have with your business is there. Okay. And after you have the business, we need to make sure that you are keeping your proper records. You keep your proper, all the evidence that you have about the business that we need to show when we're going to apply for your immigration application. And also, especially if we're looking for the significant benefit work permits, the entrepreneur work permits, we need to make sure that you get known in the community, that you're getting letters of recommendation, you're participating in award programs, social media coverage, all of that matters. Okay. And finally, well, not finally, you have to have a good business plan as well. Okay. It's not just something that you have in your head. If you don't know how to draft a business plan, you can hire professionals who can help you draft a good business plan. But that has to be in place if we're going down many of these routes for entrepreneurs, like startup visas, entrepreneur work permits, etc. And make sure you have a good immigration lawyer, and you need to get started on your applications as soon as possible. All right, so here is our contact information. We do post on social media as well, so check us out there. Let's go through some questions if you have them. If you have questions right now, you can put them in the Q&A button on your chat there. Okay. Oops.
We'll give folks a moment to put questions in. Thank
Mhm.
you for being so clear with I feel like you're very good at explaining the different components. So I think that's a really great overview, and to be just understanding that things are shifting quite quickly.
Thank you, Alex. I mean, I find it hard to be sometimes clear because the government, the policies can be so confusing and they do change so much. It's really unfortunate that we now they canceled the self-employed artist category. That was such a good program. That was one of the longest running programs. It was on there for decades.
Mm.
and now they've just canceled that. So now we're even more limited on this. Uh,
Okay, our first question.
mhm.
Um, I have a thriving studio. Sorry, I have a thriving startup in India, and I'm currently pursuing my master's at OCAD. I incorporated a federal corporation in Canada in December to expand the same business into Canada. However, I'm yet to start the business operations. What are the options for me to apply to PR, and what should I keep in mind while running this business?
Right. So, I mean, just off the bat, there are certain things I can think about. For example, the intercompany transferee work permit, entrepreneur work permits, startup visas. We certainly should have a long and detailed conversation about this, but this is a very good start in the fact that you know you have your thriving business and you're going to start another one. Yeah, that's great.
You. Okay, next question is, thank you for your presentation. Can you explain more on the path that we can apply after the master's degree? I'm assuming this is the master's and PhD track that
Right.
you were
So the
talking.
master's and PhD program is something that you can, if you graduate from a master's in OCAD, you'll qualify for, but you really need to see other options as well, because that one you can put your name in the pool, but they only select it maybe once or twice. And in the past, the numbers have been really, really high. And unfortunately, the government puts less emphasis, like they don't give you many points if at all if you study in Toronto and in the field of study for arts. So oftentimes we are seeing students who graduated with masters in arts or humanities in Toronto who, even though you're in the pool, you're waiting and you're not getting selected. So that can be a plan, but it will be probably be one of the plans. And we do need to look at options as well.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. For the startup visa, can it just be one founder if all the other eligible requirements are met?
So technically speaking, yes, one founder is available. However, and again, last year when I came, that was a different world. Later in April of last year, the government announced that each designated entity can now only accept 10 projects a year.
Oh.
When they did that, each designated entity no longer wanted to just have one support just one business for one founder, because they also get fees for every founder as well. So most of these, that you're going to have a hard time finding a designated entity that will only accept your business if you're the only founder who is applying. Usually they're looking at 4 or 5 founders per project. That's
Mhm.
not to say that, you know, a lot of times groups are founded where, let's say you have your project and you are the CEO of the business. You may also want other people who have background in finance or a background in, depending on what you're doing, you know, in manufacturing or marketing, etc. And so it might be useful to find other people, but you also certainly have to have a very good corporate strategy and a corporate plan and a contract to make sure that you still control, like
Mhm.
let's say you control 60% of your business. You're giving away 10% of your business for each founder, right? But you still want to maintain control of your company. So those are some things that you really need to speak to a good corporate lawyer about. But it's maybe a consideration as well for some people.
Yeah, and I would say that the organizations that are actually managing the startup visa, those are the incubators and accelerator spaces. So they're each going to have their own different requirements for what they're looking for. So it's a question of actually like what the accelerator or incubator space will accept as well.
Yeah, yeah. If you guys want to are thinking about startup visa as an option, do come to me and I can give you some of the more practical logistics about how things actually work in the startup visa world.
Thank you for that. Okay, next question. I'm an artist that does commission art online, and my clients are all over the world. Does it mean my working won't be limited? And can it be a way of self-employment?
Yeah, I think if you're an artist that does commissions, that you're certainly self-employed. And if you are doing commissions for someone overseas, those hours are not counted towards the limited hours that you can work in Canada, because that's you're not working for someone in Canada. The government does not control that.
Great. I'm an international student in my fourth year of graphic design from Iceland. I've been working freelance for a screen printing shop in the city. Haven't done my taxes or invoices for the past year or so, and I'm also an accomplished musician and stand-up comedian. What is my best plan for post-graduation?
Wow, this person is certainly talented. That's amazing. We do come for a consultation. Oh, by the way, guys, if you do want to come for a consultation, please let us know you're coming from OCAD so that we can give you the discounted rate. It's $100 for the consultation where we come up with a plan for you guys. So yeah, come for a consultation. We'll have to have a much longer conversation about what might work for you.
Mhm. I wanted to kind of say that we do an annual tax workshop every
Oh,
year.
mhm.
So for this person, I highly encourage you. I will be sending out an email to everyone. It's with a focus on freelancing as well, because a lot of folks are in a similar position as you, where you're doing multiple different kind of little gigs. You might also have a part-time job. How do you do your taxes? We'll answer those questions at that workshop at the end of February.
Yeah, the taxes are a huge indicator and source of evidence for the work that you do. So that's very, very important about being able to file your taxes. And for entrepreneurs, it's a very different situation than just going to H&R Block and just doing your, T4s and whatnot.
Yeah, you have to
So this,
you have to keep your own records. So very
yes,
important.
yeah, this is great. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Since the government paused the self-employment artist pathway, if I don't start my own business, then I have to get into a company in order to get PR.
It's not necessarily the case. Come for a consultation and we can go over your options. Sometimes you have to weigh the costs and benefits of being employed with
Mhm.
the company or doing your own, but it's not necessarily that you're completely not able to be self-employed.
Okay, this is referencing the earlier question about having a company already started in India. Um, I forgot to mention that I'm also planning to pursue a PhD after graduation. Is there something I should keep in mind while running a business? And I'm assuming getting into a PhD program.
Yeah, yeah. Do come for a consult and we can certainly talk about that. PhDs are very long period of time, and it may be easier, for example, for you to get funding for a PhD if you're a permanent resident. We may look at if you have a partner, if we can get your partner to be the principal applicant. So we certainly need to look at all sorts of scenarios for you.
Okay, so next question is, I'm already applying for citizenship in the future. Do I need to apply for a work permit?
I'm not sure what this person means, because if you are applying for citizenship, that means you're a permanent resident. So if you're a permanent resident, you don't need a work permit.
If that's not the case, can you clarify whomever wrote this comment and we can come back to it?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you for the great seminar. This may not be fully related to the PR pathways, but I was wondering if it's possible to work as a self-employed person, own a small business with a post-grad work permit.
Yes, you can certainly do whatever you like on a postgrad work permit. It's an open work permit. Now the question is how do you stay in Canada once your postgrad work permit expires? Because that you can only get one postgrad work permit in your lifetime. So we need to start planning ASAP, like from the very beginning, even before you apply for a postgrad work permit, as to how you're gonna stay in Canada. Because you can't stay in Canada, what's the point?
Yeah. That's a great point of like, it's kind of the long-term plan because it's not so much like, and you'll have limited time, right? Like the postgrad work permit is a limited period of time. So if you're spending all of your time in your self-employment and you're not planning, if you're actually planning to go the PR route, then you're going to run to the end of that permit and be like, I'm not ready. I can't apply for a PR. And then that's the problem. So it's
Yeah,
like
and
a piece.
yeah, and 3 years, you think 3 years is a long time, it goes by like that. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, sometimes people come to me with a year left on their postgrad work permit, and it might be a little bit too late, or, you know, so yeah, doors are closing left, right, and center, but we can still find windows to open sometimes, but do it as early as you can.
Hmm. Okay, next question. Does this mean finding a normal job like a cashier is safer if I want to stay in Canada after finishing my study? What about if I did something like part-time cashier and part-time commission? Would that be workable?
Okay, a cashier, first of all, is completely useless with regard to immigration because a cashier is a low-skill job and it doesn't get you any points for any program whatsoever. Um, you can certainly do part-time here, part-time there. Again, all these kind of specific questions, it's hard for me to give you definitive answers. And come for a consultation. I can't emphasize that enough. Don't just ask your friends, what did you do? Because your friends likely had a different situation from you and the laws change. And so do come and we can go over what your situation is like. But don't just think that doing any sort of employed job will get you permanent residence. That's certainly not the case.
Hmm. Yeah, if you're aiming for the PR, you need to really be picking specific jobs that actually get you that to that right endpoint.
Yeah. And Susan, I mean, we do these regular workshops as well, the regular webinars every year for where we go over the regular routes for people who are for looking to be employed as well. And so I think we might have something coming up. I don't know, later on this year, right, Susan? Or we'll have to
Yeah,
schedule.
yeah, I'll get in touch and we can figure
Yeah,
something out.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, just to clarify for everyone, there will Elizabeth and Susan are organizing a specific different webinar that's looking, if you are looking to become employed, aka get a job, how does that affect postgrad work permit and then PR track? This focus is very much thinking about the folks who are like, how does me starting my own business play into that kind of question mark? So little nuances, but very different tracks that people can kind of think about.
Mhm.
Okay. Next question. For the self-employed program for artists, since it's paused until January 2027, what's your perspective on its potential future? Would it be feasible for me to start working as a freelance artist under postgrad work permit in the meantime and then apply once it reopens?
Once it reopens is the question. Um, Governments don't have timelines like we normally think. When we think pause, we're like thinking pause for a month, 2 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. When they say pause, it could be forever. So we can't really depend on this program opening again. And if it ever opens, it likely would be under very different rules as well. What we can do is we can hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And we can look at the programs that are in place right now and see what you might qualify for at this time.
Mm,
Mhm.
yeah, that's a great response. If I'm interested in doing side freelance projects while I'm on the postgrad work permit, does the work permit limit what kind of clients I can work with? For example, can I work with US clients?
Oh yeah, you can do whatever you like on postgrad work permits. Postgrad work permits is an open work permit. You can do how many ever hours, whoever you want to work for, clients, etc. You can do whatever you like. But the question is afterwards,
Hmm.
will whatever work you do be useful for you to stay in Canada afterwards?
Okay, beyond self-employment, what would be the safest way to go through PR with art as a student?
That's a very, very loaded question. I can't answer that for you guys. Sometimes, before it was express entry, the points were lower if you had your master's, da, da, da. Now the points are of the 540, 530s. And so even people who were able to immigrate under traditional ways, they wouldn't be able to immigrate anymore now. So we really need to take a look at your situation. Just to give you an idea, guys. There are around 2.3 million people right now in Canada who are on work permits and study permits. And for permanent residents for economic categories, this year will be around around 100,000 is the targeted number. So the number of people who are going to be staying is around 5 or 6% who can get permanent residence. Now, that's not to say that you yourself aren't going to be able to do it and that you should give up. What it does mean is that you need to plan it very, very carefully as to how you might get permanent residence down the road, or if you can't get it right away, how you might be able to extend your work permit as well, extend your status as well. Okay. And maybe once I go through the options, you might say, well, I don't think it's worth it. Maybe I don't want to stay. Absolutely. That's great. You should know. You should know from the very beginning, before you start your business, before you start whatever it is, as to what the options are.
It sounds like the planning piece, again, coming back to that, is really important at this time, just to understand what's possible in the landscape. So next question is, my postgrad work permit expires in about a year. I'm currently employed under a company, but I still don't have enough express entry points. Could I technically switch to self-employed and get switched to a freelancer under the same company closer to my work expiry date and then apply for the work permits you mentioned to potentially extend? This sounds like a very specific question that
It's
Elizabeth
potential. Yeah, it has
please talk.
potential. It has potential. What you've said to me is potential. But again, let's meet and I can go over some options for you.
Okay, it sounds like for this individual, it sounds like you're at the place where you definitely need help with planning. So it might be good for you to speak to Elizabeth or another immigration lawyer to help you map that trajectory. Next question. Is it advisable to explore the entrepreneur route while also exploring job opportunities if there's genuine interest and potential for both routes?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of times, even though traditionally the government hasn't been that supportive of entrepreneurism, which is such a shame because entrepreneurs, I think, make the best or ideal for immigration because you're actually creating jobs. You create your own job, you create jobs for other people. And artists especially are not only creating jobs, but you guys are enhancing the cultural benefits for Canada. And so there aren't too many, but there are some. And we can certainly point towards the significant benefit of your contribution to Canada down the road. But that being said, it's not a one, like right away you can do that. You might have to use your postgrad work permit to show that you are creating cultural benefits, and then we can apply because you have already done it to show that we need a further work permit to do so. So there's a lot of groundwork that you have to do at the very beginning, and in order to move forward on that.
Next question is, besides art, I also tutor piano for a living, around 10 hours a week. It's a private tutor, so I'm not doing it through any talent company. And payment is through e-transfer. Oh, this is a tax question. Okay. I'm gonna say that please hold that for our tax workshop because Elizabeth is not an accountant. So feel free to also email me. We can talk about this in with some detail, and I can share more about just some things you need to know about bookkeeping. But for the interest of getting through the rest of the questions that are relevant specifically for Elizabeth's expertise, I'm gonna move on. The next question is, most OCAD students will likely be getting a postgrad work permit. Is there any advantage applying for any of the other permits, such as a startup visa, apart from the postgrad work permit?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get arranged deployment points right now for express entry. And the postgrad work permit will expire, and so you need to extend it. Startup visa is a permanent residence application. So you can, if you apply for that, you can get permanent residence. Startup visa, the work permit as well will allow spouses as well to get work permits. So if that's a concern, because they just issued new rules on spousal work permits, limiting spousal work permits for people who have the tier 2 and 3 occupations, or to only certain occupations. So, but startup visa work permits are allowed for spouses to get their spousal work permits as well.
Next question is, I'm in my 4th year. If I apply for a work permit this summer, will I still be eligible for a 3-year work permit?
They're in their 4th year of bachelor's. If they apply for work permit, are they eligible for a 3-year work permit? If you are finishing your bachelor's, you've completed your bachelor's, then, and it's a 4-year program, then yeah, you can qualify for postgrad.
Great. Next question. Thank you for the great seminar. This may not be fully related to the PR pathway, but I'm wondering, is it possible to work as a self-employed person, own a small business with a postgrad work permit?
I feel like we already answered this
The
particular
answer is
question.
yes.
Yes, you can do whatever you want on the postgrad. Yeah.
Is there a specific pathway for establishing enterprises/projects that are more social based
And
with
with
a community
yeah.
impact?
So that's a very good question. There is a work permit called a charitable person work permit. And so for the charitable work permit, you can actually apply for a work permit that's alumni exempt. And if you are going to be doing charitable work. And it's not just you're working for a charity, but the fact that the work that you are doing is going to benefit the community as well. So that's a very interesting thing. And certainly we can talk about that more.
Next question is, I'm studying in the Digital Futures Master's program. I'm aware that the OINP stream has extra points for having completed a STEM program. Is there any way to figure out if the Digital Futures Masters qualifies as a STEM program?
Normally it's a matter of us putting in submissions as to whether or not your program was a STEM program. But so I have to look at the your degree and what it is, and whether or not the OIMP master's program is a good option for you.
Thank you. Okay, so what work permits do we apply for after the postgrad work permit expires? I have heard there is a permit called the bridge work permit.
Okay, so you have to qualify for a work permit. And some of the work permits that I talked about are programs for if you're self-employed, some things that you can apply for that you might be able to qualify for. There are a host of all kinds of other work permits. The bridging work permit is something where if you have applied and have been accepted, you've received the acknowledgement of receipt for your work permit for your permanent residence, then you can apply for work permit. For example, if you have been invited to apply through express entry, not just you put yourself into the pool. You've been invited to apply through express entry. You've submitted your application, then we can do a bridging work permit.
This is a great follow-up. How do we get a consult with you? Which email or office do I go to?
Yes. So if you email right on this slide, inquiries@lmlawgroup.com, just let them know that you come from OCAD. Tell us what exactly the situation is, and then we will certainly set you up for a consultation.
Yes, and you can see Elizabeth's contact all in on the slide that's currently up right now. Okay. I think this is a question around getting points. So a job with higher skills means more points.
Higher skills is a very subjective information. But there are certain tiers. So on the webinar that we usually have for the normal one that we have for with Susan, we talk about tiers and certain skill levels and the knock codes, etc. And so the government will favor certain occupations over others for a lot of these programs.
So I would say stay tuned for that, which explains what it means to even get points and how that gets considered.
Mhm.
Another thank you for a great seminar. I think you answered this a bit, but I'm just gonna read it. I'm an artist that's doing commission online as well, and I'm wondering, do I need to have experience in Canada for PR? Is it essential to get relevant work in, yes, work in Canada with several years?
It just depends on your situation, but looking at different kinds of PR programs, if you are in Canada, you're lucky enough to have that postgrad work permit. It probably will give you a good advantage to get PR, but I'm not saying for sure that you can get PR or you can't. We need to explore some more about the pathways to get there.
Yeah, again, I think for most of you folks, it will be a specific conversation with your situation and mapping it out against what's possible. Okay. You talked about graphic design as LMIA exempt. So can UX design, product design, or inclusive design, or anything design related to graphic design qualify for exemption?
Uh, it, it depends on the free trade agreement. I said some free trade agreements allow for graphic designers to get the work permit for the free trade agreement. So I'm not exactly sure what your situation might be. We can certainly take a look at certain programs that might be available for you.
Okay. Can you have overlapping applications for different kind of relevant visas? For example, having a partner willing to sponsor me, postgrad work permit, skilled workers, OINP, etc. Or do I have to apply for one, wait for approval, rejection, etc., one at a time?
Right. So you can apply for different applications at different times. There's certain things you don't want to do, like apply for two different provinces and say I want to live in both. I intend to live in both of them. I mean, that would contradict each other. But most of the time, yeah, I might apply for express entry at the same time as a provincial nominee program, or I might enter at least into different pools. So yeah, that could be a possibility. You can only get one permanent residence in the end. And so sometimes people are like, oh, I'm going to apply to everything that I could possibly qualify for. But you don't necessarily need to do that. We really need to look at the chances of success for certain applications and whether or not it's worth it to hedge your bets.
Great. We
Awesome.
have gone through all of the questions.
Wow. Amazing. Right on time too.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions. I think the takeaway for folks who are still here is if you are thinking about your specific scenario, it does sound like it makes sense to have a consultation to be able to ask specifically about your situation. We're treating this kind of like as a general, just so so you can kind of get the right questions and the right framing, so that you can kind of take it to the next level. But it does sound like it's a very unique situation based on everyone's wherever they're at. And things are changing, as Elizabeth said. So I think it will be one of those things to for some of you who are still in school for a few more years and those who are graduating this year, the situation might be really different 1 year from now.
And I know this situation in Canada can be very, very stressful. This immigration system, I got all my gray hair, let's say, in the last few years, and I'm probably going to get a lot more after this. But and I when I just wanted to maybe tell you a little story about when my family, when we were immigrating. My father did his PhD, and he was a professor in Memorial University in Newfoundland. And that, when they were immigrating, we were immigrating in the 90s. The skilled worker class just started, and we had an interview with the immigration officer. And the immigration officer, when we went there, said, "Well, why should I let you in Canada?" And my father said, "Well, I have a PhD in Canada." He's like, "I don't care." And he said, "Well, I'm teaching in Memorial University." He said, "So what?" And then we had an immigration lawyer who stood up, looked the officer in the eye, and said, "If you don't want these people in Canada, who do you want in Canada?" And my mother said, at that point, the officer shut up and, let us pass. These days, you don't necessarily have an interview, and it is very difficult because that is still the question that is asked is, if you don't want these people in Canada, who the hell do you want in Canada? And that's why I do the job that I do today, because my family went through this, and I feel that's why I have this passion for this job, because I want to tell the government, if you don't want these people in Canada, who the hell do you want in Canada? Let them in. And my job becomes harder and harder every day, but I do want you guys to, if you can, try to stay in Canada, because I truly believe that it's people like you guys who do make this country great. All right. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alex and Susan, for arranging this. I think it's very important that people have this advice and information going forward.